When I was 25, I found myself beside a pond so dirty I couldn't even see my own reflection, in a land so foreign that no one could understand a single word that I said. What I did see, however, was a long line of refugees who were just waiting for me to purify that water just so that they could live another day. I was living my dream of traveling the world and helping people in my first job ever. And I did so without a prestigious corporate internship, without a great GPA, without even a job application, but by a series of wild, unconventional steps that I can only attribute to divine providence. This is the crazy story of how I landed my dream job through a miracle. But to understand how crazy this was, I need to take you back to when I was 20, fresh out of army, didn't know what to do with my life, just kind of going through the motions. Until one day I attended a church camp. And what happened during this church camp was that the speaker was talking about how there are so many adults who used to have childhood dreams but lost it as they were growing up. But then I thought to myself, actually I've never really had a childhood dream. So during the discussion when people were sharing about their dreams, I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna make my own. And the one thing that I remembered as a young teenager when I was sitting in church, I'll listen to the stories of missionaries and pastors, and I wonder to myself, I'll imagine what would it be like to be able to travel the world and just help people. But at the same time, I didn't want to do so as a missionary. I wanted to do so with something that was, practical and was able to be paid for it. And the only thing I had at the time was that I was already going to enroll in the Bachelor of Environmental Studies. And the only reason I took up environmental studies was honestly because I felt like God just kind of led me towards that course. But then I figured the nexus between environment and helping people was in the area of water. So that was the dream that I created: travel around the world and bring clean drinking water to people. But what I didn't expect was what happened next would be really crazy. So about midway through my university, I actually had a chance to go to Thailand for a field study trip. As part of that trip, I had a 1 week stay in the village. And during that stay, I did a project, and this is one of the cool parts. Out of 60 students that had to bid for a project, I was the only one that got my first choice of the project. And my project was to stay in the village, to take the water samples from their rainwater, their river water, their well water, and their bottled water, and to test out whether their water was safe to drink. So for 1 week, I went around to the different houses, talked to the different people, collect their water sources. And the key thing was that when I collected their water samples, the people would ask me, is my water safe to drink? And honestly, I didn't have the answer yet because I needed to send the samples to the lab. But somehow I felt like even as I was doing this, I kind of had a glimpse into my future. I don't know why. It was just kind of like a feeling that I think I would be doing this, for my job. But because of that glimpse, I think that also kind of gave me this almost overconfidence that I felt like, okay, this is my destiny, and whatever plans I make is gonna lead me towards that destination. So initially, I thought what I'll do is I'll become a environmental consultant, hopefully in a MNC, in a multinational company that will give me the opportunity to eventually work in an overseas office. So because of that, 2 years later, when I graduated, I only applied for one job. I only applied for one job, an environmental consultancy job. Now, obviously, that is terrible advice. No one will ever tell you to just apply for one job. But I had that confidence. I felt like I was the child of destiny. But I was about to get a reality check. So you see, after I graduated, there's maybe that 2 to 3 months where people are just enjoying going on holiday and then they'll start their job. Well, for me, I did that. I went for the holidays. But afterwards, towards like July, when I realized that one company I applied for wasn't really getting back to me, I started feeling a bit down. I started feeling a bit hopeless. I started wondering, am I being too idealistic? And should I apply for more jobs? And then one of the things I remembered was in a career essay I wrote to my professor. He actually said, hey, if you want to travel the world and help people out and do something missional, you should do it when you're young, not when you're older. So they got me thinking maybe I should just join an NGO and see what happens. And it happened at one fateful day, end of July, about 2 months after I graduated, where most of my friends already started on their jobs while I was still binging on Netflix, playing games, and started feeling really kind of like hopeless and not sure what I'm doing with my life. Why am I wasting it away? One day I suddenly received an email from this NGO, which I had seen at a conference somewhere else about a year ago. They were celebrating their first year anniversary. And something gripped me that day. I just felt like, hey, I felt like reading through their website. Normally, I don't really read websites. So on one of the pages, they actually interviewed the CEO of Waterroom, David, who would eventually be my boss. So I decided to drop him a text. Now, one part I missed out earlier was that I actually met the CEO of Waterroom, David, through another divine connection. I was just going for a Christian conference. Someone asked me, "Hey, what do you want to do in the future?" And I said, "Oh, I want to go around help people with clean water." Then she was like, "Oh, I know someone that already does that." So I connected with him, but at that time, I don't know why I just didn't think of applying for a job or asking them more. I just thought that maybe they only needed engineers, and I kind of disqualified myself. Plus, I also already had my big plan to become an environmental consultant first. So I never thought about them. So when I messaged David, it was really to ask, hey, what's your collaboration with the NGO? I'm thinking of maybe, joining them. And then he gave me a short reply. It didn't seem like he was really interested to help. So I just thought, well, that's a dead end. So without much option that night, I remember that night after reading through the email, receiving his text, I felt really down. And I thought to myself, you know what, I should pray about this, because for a few weeks already, I've been thinking I should pray, I should pray, I should pray. I just never got around to praying. I don't know why, I just really lazy, I guess. Now, here's the next crazy part that happened, which honestly, even when I prayed, I didn't even like pray correctly. So I was supposed to pray for my job, but I ended up praying for my church. I ended up praying for the church that I was serving at. And as I was praying, I suddenly remembered this journal entry that I had written like 3 months ago, right, about the church. So I went to that journal entry, I went to read it, I prayed, and then suddenly below the entry, I saw another vision that I had written down, and it was about my future job. So I'm gonna put up the what the vision looks like on screen. Now, when I'm looking at this room, I'm seeing it both what it is as well as what it should be at the same time. It was almost as though this room is split down in half. One half is what it is, the other half is what it should be. Now, at the time when I had written this, just before I graduated, I had no idea what it meant. But now, 3 months later, I totally understood what it meant because of the things that I had gone through just that past month. You see, because I didn't have my job, I was just going through Netflix and gaming, and I started feeling really dull. I even wrote in my journal at that time, life feels really dull right now. So that represents this half of the room where it's really dull, very lifeless. Now, what the fire in the fireplace represents, and what the painting actually represents, and the whole idea of it was that as I gaze into the painting, as I look at it, that becomes my vision, that becomes the thing that I keep my eyes and focus on. And the fire in the fireplace is supposed to represent my fervency in prayer. So basically, it means that as long as I keep my eyes on the vision and continue to pray towards it, then I'll experience a fruitful life, exciting life. And if I didn't have these things, then I'll have the very dull life. So after receiving this vision, I just, prayed a very quick, short prayer about my job, and I just felt so encouraged that God already knew what was going to happen in my life, and He gave me like a vision before I started feeling this way. So I went to sleep feeling full of trust and just not worried about my future job. Little did I know that a miracle would come the very next morning. And lo and behold, the next morning, David drops me a message and say, "Hey, if you haven't found a job yet, why don't you join us for a part-time internship while you figure out your next steps?" And I was like, "Oh my God, this is an answer. This has to be an answer from God." Like I just prayed that the previous night, and now I've already gotten this. So I went in for a chat the next week. It was my interview. I printed out my transcript and what I've done before. Honestly, not much. And the only thing they asked me was, "Hey, what are you doing right now?" And I said, "Oh, actually, in the past 2 weeks, I've been doing some part-time volunteering with an NGO that serves injured migrant workers in Singapore." And they got really interested in that for some reason. So they started asking me more questions about that. So after that, they didn't really ask me about my thesis or about my grades. They just said, "Hey, why don't you go and work for them part-time and then work for us part-time as well?" So at that time, they were testing out a new prototype. The product that I'll eventually be using throughout my 8 years there, it was a water filter that could be used with a hand pump so that you can use it in disaster zones and in places without electricity. And the key thing was they needed to make sure it was really simple. So they wanted to test it out with people who maybe weren't so educated. Now in Singapore, most of us have a pretty good education. So one of the ideas they had was to put a infographic on the back of the product to make sure that people understood how to use it without being able to read English. And interestingly, because they are a pretty small company at the time, they wanted to go overseas and test it out, but they didn't really have the opportunity or funds to do so. And so one of their startup advisors said, "Hey, actually, we have a lot of migrant workers in Singapore. Why don't you go and test out the product with them and see whether they know how to use it. But even then, they also don't have connections to the migrant workers. And that's when I came in precisely at the right time when I say, hey, I'm actually volunteering with migrant workers. So that's what I did at the start of my time at Water Room. I would spend the 2 or 3 days part time to learn about the product, test it out, market it. And the other 2 days when I was volunteering with the migrant workers at the NGO, I'll actually bring that hand pump filter and the infographic and I'll test it out with them and got all the feedback. A few weeks after I joined, we were able to finish the prototype and we started to mass manufacture the product. And then in just 3 months, we landed a client who wanted to purchase the water filters to use it in the Rohingya refugee camps in Bangladesh. And because I was the main person talking to him, we ended up booking the flight out, just me and my client going to the refugee camps to pump up clean water for the villagers there. So yeah, for 1 week, I was going around to the different refugee camps and using the filter and teaching different NGOs and the different people we were supporting how to use the water filters. And interestingly, if you can see on the thumbnail, I actually put out this like newspaper headline that says Singaporean pumps clean water for refugees. That's because I had posted on Instagram stories about what I was doing. And just nice, someone from my church, she was being tasked to talk about what Singaporeans were doing for the Rohingya refugees. And then she just saw my story pop up. So she just did like a call interview, and that's how I ended up getting my photo into the newspaper. So that's the story of how I landed my dream job without an internship, without a job application. And honestly, even though I said it was a miracle, and it is, but it's also because there were certain key steps that I took, unconventional steps that led me to living out my dream job. One was that I was following my own path and I was actually actively pursuing the things that they were giving me meaning and purpose. So I mentioned that I got to know the CEO of Water Room through this other Christian conference. At the time I was attending this conference, I really felt like it was important for my spiritual growth. And then just by being there, I happened to bump into somebody who knew the CEO of Water Room. So that's like a divine connection that I could never manufacture myself. And on top of that, I decided to volunteer at a seemingly random NGO, but it turned out that whatever I was volunteering for was what my future company also needed. So that's also like, that's also pretty crazy. The second point is on just being open and curious. I think initially I was just so fixated on this idea of becoming an environmental consultant because I thought that was the way forward. What I didn't know was that that wasn't the story that was written for me, and that because I was open and curious and just continued trying out different things, I actually ended up being at the right place and the right time. And the last point, which is the most important, is whatever I told you in this story, honestly, most of it was not even because of me. It's not like I created the pathways towards it. Sure, I was curious. Sure, I went and pursued the things that were important to me. But being at the right place at the right time is much less to do with me and more so with God who has written out my story. So I have this strong belief that if God can write out my story in such a way, he can write out yours as well. So the key thing I want to say is that you need to trust God because he is the one who has written your story and he will make it happen. So hey, if you made it to the end of this video, I'm no longer working at Water Room. I actually started my own company and I'm running this Purpose Finder Guy YouTube channel to help you find your true identity and purpose in life. So if you feel like you're lost and you don't really know what's your direction, you don't really have a dream in life, then hopefully this story has inspired you. And if you're interested to learn more about your purpose in life, I actually developed a systematic framework to help you connect the dots in your life so that you can find what gives you a sense of joy, meaning, and satisfaction. You can check out this framework. It's called the Find Your Purpose course, and I put it down in the link in the description below. Anyway, if you want to see how this story unfolded and why I eventually left my dream job, you can check out this video here. I'll post it up once I've created it, and I'll see you in the next video.